So I thought I would start at the beginning and try to tell you a story and try to give you a little insight and orientation to how we think about and look at data. I've been doing the analysis off the registry since the data was the 1998 data. But a couple years before that, I started collaborating with the Northern New England CF group. So I've been doing this a long time, and it's a lot of fun. It's good to see a lot of familiar faces. Okay. So data. Hospitals and clinical care systems have data, just numbers and columns of information, columns of data, numbers that it's hard to see what you've got. But you can take data and try to make it into information. So you plot it, you connect the dots, and you then try to come up with some knowledge. So from that previous graph, it looked like, if we go back, this is across the bottom is BMI percentile, and vertically is lung function. So the slope is very positive. The blue line is boys and the pink line is girls. So better lung function is associated with better nutrition. So go ahead. So from that knowledge, we make some assertions of what kind of change we want to make. We want to make sure that every patient with CF gets the best nutrition possible, so that will protect their lungs. Okay? So this is a loop. You start with your data, you try to make information out of it, you look at that information and you try to draw pieces of knowledge, actionable items. You then make an assertion of what kind of change you want to make in a typical process, and then you go back and you measure again and create new data and see if that change has made a difference. So that's the loop that I want to try to lay out for you of how data works towards up the pyramid to information and change. So here is some made-up data of a patient, Mary, who was 15 in 2004. And I think you probably do you guys get to see your individual data from Port CF where it's possible to plot your lung function and BMI over time? Do those graphs get shared? So this graph just vertically is, on the top it's FEV1 % predicted, what's your lung function, and on the bottom it's BMI percentile. And then across the horizontal axis you can see it's just dates. So this is what is happening with Mary over time for her pulmonary function and her nutrition. So that's starting to be information. But you can also annotate this data and start to look at it in terms of better information and trying to draw some knowledge from this. So if you had to draw knowledge from this graph, what kind of assertions would you like to make? Is there anything you could say about this graph? In the middle of 2006, she went into the hospital. And then in the September of 2007, she started college. Is there something you could say here? She started out in 2004 with a lung function that was in the high 90s, and she's dropped down 20 points. So that's knowledge. She's losing lung function. She's an adolescent, and this is a risky time for her, and she's going off to college, and that's a time of transition. So that's even more knowledge, understanding what Mary is experiencing in her life, and what kind of change would you like to see from this? Mary could work with her clinicians and say, I want to protect myself during my freshman year, when that's a time of enormous risk for every kid who goes out there. 18, I'm free of parental supervision, but also parental support. So that's a kind of looking at data and trying to draw the knowledge and then the change that you want to make. I think all of us, well, at least a lot of us have tried to lose weight over time, and plotting your weight over time and then annotating what's happening at different stages, you yourself are adding knowledge and to that information, and then you start to try to make change. Okay, here I'm going to add a day a week of exercise. Let's see, keep plotting the data over time. Do I have good results from that change that I've made? So it's a loop. Data, information, knowledge, change, and then collect data again. So Mary could use this data to try to plan her freshman year with her clinicians as she goes off. She should come back at Christmas perhaps, check in, make sure that her home clinic gets a good look at her, etc. So, all right, next slide please. So, I want to make one point about data. The way that we look at data commonly in populations. One way is the mean. When you look at miles per gallon, for example, you're looking at the average miles per gallon your car gets over a tank of gas. That's the mean. Does everybody know how to calculate an average or a mean? You take all of the values you have, you add them up, and you divide by the number of values. So if I have 4 values, I add up my 4 values and I divide that total by 4. That gives me the average or the mean. Now that's a great number for many things. But sometimes you have data where it's exceptional. For example, in your car, you get terrible gas mileage on 1 tank of gas, and you realize you were waiting for your kid at the hockey rink and you were freezing to death, so you were idling your car for an hour and reading. So that drops the gas mileage way down low. So you have, at that point, you have an extreme value. It's not representative of what your car does most of the time. Sometimes we like to look at a median value, and this median is a good way to remember it. It's the middle of the road. On each side of the median is the same number of objects, people or cars. It's all right. Thanks. So the median is a really, really great way to look at data because you know that for that group of people or objects, it's the middle. Half of people are better and half the people are worse or faster or slower or whatever it is. So let's think about income. For a mean value of income, that's my 17-year-old. He worked construction last summer, and he made $2,500. So Nurse Jackie, the typical income for a nurse, is a little over $66,000. But Bill Gates made $350 million last year. So if you tried to calculate the mean of these values, the next slide, you get 117 million. That really isn't very representative of our population here. You know, the nurse is much better, or maybe someplace between my son and the nurse, who knows. But this 117 million is not a good number. Next slide. But if you were to calculate the median, what you do is you take each person and order them in terms of the values. So my son, the nurse, and Bill Gates are put in order, and the person in the middle is the nurse. So half the people are below her and half the people are above her, and that's much more representative of what the population is doing. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah. Great. Okay, so everybody hates measurement and data and all of that kind of thing, but I'm going to make you guys do a little bit of work. On your table are M&Ms. You can either sort the M&Ms and give me a median value number of M&Ms in each color, or, next slide, you can just tell me what the median age is of everybody at your table, and it's all right to lie, and then you can just eat the M&Ms. Okay? So if you have an odd number of people at your table, the median value is the value of the person who's in the middle. So if you have 5, it's the person who's the third from the top and the third from the bottom. If you have an even number of people at your table, you order everybody and you look at the people who are on either side of that middle and you split the difference, and that's the median value. So let everybody do that. Just take 2 minutes here, and you can lie, so don't be embarrassed. I just got to wait. Pardon? All right, let's just go through and everybody tell me what your median is. 36. Next table.
47.
Next table back. Median age. Mary, do you know it?
40.
Yeah, really. I believe that.
Next. Come up here. 42. Next back. Gosh, there's a lot of uniformity here. Go back. Up front.
Okay, well, we're not even apart, just no. 51 and a half. We have no big deal.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So I've got 12 values. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The median value for all of these medians is 42. So that's the middle value. That's half of you in this room are older than 42 and half of you are younger. Does that make sense? Everybody happy with that? Okay, let's go on then. You go ahead. We don't have to do that. I was just ready. That's right. That's right. Age is the one you can't fix. All right, so now let's look at this graph again, where I was showing you the relationship between BMI percentile and lung function, where the pink is the girls and the blue is the boys. And this is for children who are 6 to 19 years of age. Now, a percentile is exactly what we're talking about when we do a median. Because a percentile, if you remember from taking SATs, you get what percentile you're in, like you're the 75th percentile on your English test. That means you're doing better than 75% of the population. So a BMI percentile of 50 is the median value for the population. Half of the US population is below this value, and half of them are above. Does that make sense to everybody? Great. So each FEV1 value on this line for girls is the median value of everyone at the 50th percentile. The median value for girls is just over 90% predicted in your lung function. Since the CF Foundation has decided as one of its goals that there's no reason that children with CF shouldn't grow normally and have normal nutrition, their goal has been that everybody, the population as a whole, should be at the 50th percentile. And you can see that that kind of maximizes lung function, and without encouraging people to be obese. So that's how that goal was set for the CF Foundation for Nutrition. They looked at the data, made it into information, tried to gain knowledge from it, and the change is that the goal is everyone should be at the 50th percentile. Okay. So not to leave adults out of this equation, but there is now, we don't do percentiles in adults because everybody's getting fat. The population is getting too overweight. So this is just straight BMI. So a BMI of 20 to 25 is optimum for the population. They consider overweight anything over 25, and anything over 30 is obese. So our goal, pink is again women and blue is again men, is a BMI of 22 for women and 23 for men. And you can see that that produces lung function around the 70% predicted. So that's another set of goal setting from the foundation. Okay, next graph. So I know a lot of you are interested in, have young children newly diagnosed. And I just wanted to explain a little bit of the thinking behind the early push on nutrition for kids. The idea is that if you attain normal weight, either measured by weight or BMI, then you can attain your genetic potential for height. And taller people have more lung volume, absolute more lung volume, and perhaps relatively a little bit more too. So they have better lung volume, and at the end, when you're an adult and you're starting to get sick, just having bigger, healthier lungs is going to make you live longer. So that's the chain that we're working here. When kids are young, what you work on is getting good nutrition so that they can grow normally, and that has effects when they're in their 30s and 40s. Okay. So let's look at this graph and think about what's going on here. Across the bottom is age, 0 to 20, and each line is a group of kids who are born in different times. So this group was born between 1980 and 1984. This group was born, the green line is 85 to 89. Yellow is 90 to 94. 95 to 99 is red. 2000 to 2004 was purple. And 2000, kids born 2005 to the present is black. So what's happening? Each population, if you're diagnosed, and they're not diagnosed immediately without newborn screening, so these kids lost a little ground and then rapidly caught up until the time they're age 4. And then through the school years, you lose ground. Then in adolescence, hormones kick in, and everybody has a nice little growth bump. And then again, risk-taking behavior and getting out from mom and dad's supervision, people lose ground again through late adolescence. So this profile has been pretty constant. You see, we started to make a little progress, 80 to 84 to 85 to 90. But now we're starting to see even more progress. We have been pushing really hard on nutrition since the early 1990s. That was when the new nutrition guidelines came out from the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, when they realized that diets high in fat were really good for kids. Before that, because fat was so hard to digest, kids in the U.S. had a low-fat diet. But the Canadians had discovered this high-fat diet with lots of enzyme use. The U.S. adopted this, and now we're starting to see real progress. However, these kids, if you have a 14 or 15-year-old, can you give them a kick in the butt? Because I don't want this red line hitting here. I want this red line to go back up. The kids who were born from 2000 to 2004, you can see they're growing nicely at the 40th percentile, and they're holding it. They're not losing ground through the school years, which is just terrific. Now, look. The kids who were born most recently are just about at the population median. They're at the 50th percentile for growth in weight. And the nutritionist professionals around me say, if the population has a normal weight percentile, you're going to start to get normal linear height. Yes?
So when you say the population, you're talking in general?
Yes. When I say general population, I mean the U.S. population. I think that's for nutrition, that's a good reference population. Kids with CF should grow normally at the genetic potential. And I'm talking about the population as a whole. If your kid, if both parents are really, really skinny, and your kid tends to be a little skinny, you can push them a little harder against your genetic potential. But 50th percentile is a goal. So these kids are at the 49th percentile for weight. Next slide, please. You can see this is now the same graph for height percentiles. And you can see that there really wasn't much change because the kids were skinny. They just hadn't grown much in height. A little bit of progress in adolescence. The red line shows the first glimmer of change. Time to kick those kids so that they grow. The purple line, still more progress. Now the black line, you can see the kids born since 2005 are above the 40th height percentile. So that's really encouraging. We're starting to see the kids grow normally. Now there's a ton of kids out there with CF who are really tall and are growing normally. I'm talking about the middle of the population is now above the 40th percentile. Is everybody happy with that? Understand what they're looking at? Okay, next slide. Now, the chain I was talking about was weight leads to height, leads to more lung volume. This is what happens with lung function. Here again is the middle value for the population, the median. Age, starting at 6, because that's when we first start doing consistent PFTs. So kids 6 to 20. And this is lung function vertically. And you can see what happened with the kids born in the early 80s. Some progress, better drugs, better antibiotics. Pulmazine starts coming on, Toby, steady progress. And now the kids who were born in that since 2000 are really holding their lung function. And even these kids who are now teenagers are still above 90% of predicted. And most pulmonologists will tell you that's pretty darn normal. So I can't tell you that good nutrition causes 100% of the time good lung function, but good nutrition sets you up as a group of people to have better lung function. Okay, next slide. So I'd like to tell you a little bit of a story of the national improvement and how did change happen here. Okay, so here is, still we're looking at BMI for kids who are 2 to 20. Each blue bar is one of the 170 CF centers in the United States. So the green bar over here is showing you what overall the population has gotten up to 48.7. But, and the red line is a goal from the CF Foundation of 50th percentile. But you can see we have some centers up here who are doing like maybe too well, but you know, really doing well on nutrition. And there are some centers who are really lagging. So what is the difference? I mean, it's not like there's a magic food pill that some centers have access to. There's not pharmaceutical randomized clinical trials. We're going to give your kids bad food. You guys can have good food, and then we'll see what the result is. No, this is just the same kids aren't getting the same system of care as these kids are. If we can teach these people, parents, kids, clinicians, what it is that these centers are doing, we would get everybody up to this line. And that would be really a good thing. Next slide. So the same kind of variation in BMI is out there for adults. I mean, these are really malnourished adults. And these centers are doing well. So if we could teach all of these guys what these adults are doing, we would have a healthier population. Next slide. Likewise, similar variation for FEV1 % predicted. Pulmonary function, the same kind of variation as we're seeing in nutrition. There are centers where the kids are below the 80th percentile for lung function. And you could see that the population, by and large, up through adolescence, could be above the 90th percentile. So this looks like an easy place to learn. What are these centers doing? Now in this case, the goal of 100 is what 100% of predicted is what the U.S. population without CF was doing, and that's what the CF Foundation has set as a goal, and it may not be attainable, but it's a good and lofty goal to keep kids to having normal lungs. Next. And this is the median FEV1 for adults with a goal of the 75th percentile. but there are some centers where adults are below the 60th percentile, 60% predicted, sorry. So what can we help? How can we help them? We're not trying to, this level of variation has only been known about for the last 10 years. And only in the last 5 years have we figured out we can do something about it and what those things are. Okay, so defining the best centers in the country was what the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation did as their quality improvement effort in the early 2000s. We identified care centers with the best lung function. We tried to understand how those care centers are delivering care and immediately tried to share those smart change ideas. Next slide. So this is the hard part for a lot of clinicians, is the transparency part, going naked with your data. But if you don't know who is who, you don't know who to talk to, who to learn from. So this is a great calendar. It's the Men of Maple Grove. So anyway, I decided to take our Northern New England data and just show you how our Northern New England centers do. So this is New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine Med, and Eastern Maine and Bangor. And this is median BMI percentile for patients 2 to 20. Next slide. And here's BMI for adults. Here's Portland. So you've got good nutrition, really good nutrition around here. Next slide. Here is Vermont, New Hampshire, EMMC and Portland. Have a chance to learn perhaps, or get the patients on board with making some smart changes. And here's adults. Vermont, New Hampshire, Bangor, Portland. Okay? So, I've tried to highlight through my discussion here what's going on. You know, Mary was turning 18. She's an emerging adult. She's going off to school. So this is just a summary of the results for the population that's turning 18, that's 18 to 19 years old, starting in 1994, 96, and I'm just taking it up to 2006. They were bopping along. There's a little bit of improvement. Here is BMI. They're still below the 30th percentile. The CF Quality Grant Program started. We started to push really hard in 2002. There has been steady progress in this population. We are now graduating kids to adult care who are at the 35th BMI percentile, compared to in 2000 they were crossing at about the 25th BMI percentile. So in this population they've gained 10 points just in a few years. Next slide. Likewise, for lung function in kids 18 to 19, they were just bopping along, still below the 70th percentile. And then this change of 10 FEV1 percentage points, that means years of life, because adults steadily lose lung function. This means like 8 to 10 more potential years of life. But they're graduating to adult CF programs now with FEV1 of 78%. That is so much better. Next slide. And this is the predicted survival, is the number that comes out every year for from the foundation. It bounces around a little bit, so they're always a little concerned because sometimes it goes down. It's just because the numbers are small. It's not really because anything's changed. But you can see they were kind of bopping along and up and down around 30 years of median predicted survival. Next slide. We're now up to 38. And I think that this just shows that even bringing change to kids who have been on the ground for 15 years, we are starting to see the whole population is moving and getting better. It's not too late. getting in there early with nutrition is of the best, but everybody can improve, including adults. Do these graphs make sense to everybody? Okay. All right, so Anna asked me to talk a little bit about what family groups can do. There are a number of family groups out in the country. They kind of wax and wane. People with new energy come in and things go great guns for a little while, but it really is hard to maintain the effort for a long period of time. It's much easier to coalesce around certain topics, a project. The New Hampshire CF Parents Group, Patients and Families Group, was very, very energized and enthusiastic and got newborn screening passed in the legislature, and that they now need to find a new topic because their energy has kind of died. But I wanted to tell you about two programs out there that had some nice results. The first one is the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. They looked at their data for emerging adults who are 18 to 25, and they weren't happy with the lung function they had in that group. Their lung function was about, I think it was mid-60s, so below what they wanted to see. So they had a very specific goal. They said that they were going to improve their lung function. They wanted to improve their lung function by 5% and raise their BMI to over 22 in 1 year in the emerging adult population. And they just wanted to assess and improve patient adherence and through better patient knowledge and breaking down barriers. Okay, so the family group developed a couple of forms to help patients communicate what their concerns were with their clinicians, because it can be an issue for 18-year-olds who are now trying to talk to clinicians as adults. There may be barriers and shyness and issues, but this is just a couple of forms that were filled out in the clinic before any encounters with the clinical team. Okay. What the clinical team did was engage fully with the parents and families, and they embraced this project. They assessed their patients. They got all of the new staff involved to understand what quality improvement meant. They used PortCF to track to make sure that patients were coming back into the clinic. Adults who are fairly healthy tend to like to skip clinic appointments. So they tried to work on that aspect. And they, as a team, increased their number of face-to-face meetings. So this is the first form that the family group put together. It was called About Me. It's just, next one. It just talks about some of the personal details that aren't typically part of a clinic visit. What do I like to be called? What is my faith? What are my hobbies? What's important to me? What I'm worried about now? What's stressful? Those kinds of things. The next page. Also, this is filled out by the patients. You just circle. It's like oboe and pound when you want to put together your custom sandwich. You circle the pieces you want. This customizes the clinic visit so that the clinicians know what's concerning to a patient at any time. Next one. So this is what they did. In 2008, their emerging adults had a 67.4% predicted lung function. And in 2009, it had come up to 73.5. So rather suspiciously, they exactly met their goal. However, I think a little of it is that you can see that for this group, the lung function went down. So I think maybe a couple sick people moved up in age. But by and large, if you look across all of the adults' populations, there was improvement. So this focused project on emerging adults had spillover so that all adults started to see some of the benefits. You can't say to somebody, no, you're not allowed to fill out that form because you're 26. This was started to be more generally used in the clinic. Okay? So this is another group that has a different approach. They were less data-driven. I think the first group, that adult care team had just come out of a quality improvement initiative and had shared that. And some of the patients and families had been part of that QI team, and so were really gung-ho on the strict QI methodology and had a nice success there. This Central Connecticut CF group has been around for a long time. I love their motto, "Where people are great, we just make them better." I think that's great. But anyway, next slide. They have a mission statement, much as you do. I can share this with you. Next one. What they did was put together on a booklet, because the families were most concerned about the inpatient experience. They felt like they understood the outpatient part. They had home care down, but inpatient was really sort of a black hole. So they set about creating an admission booklet that's for the patients, but also has a lot of input from the clinicians. So this is kind of an agreed to contract. Next slide. And this is hard to read because it's so dense, but oops, hello. They were looking at barriers to perfect care. So they went through, they looked at what patients and families have, what the providers were in. They troubleshot and brainstormed a lot of ideas about what the providers and the patients and families did. What were the barriers to perfect care in the inpatient process and in the outpatient process? This kind of lays out an enormous map. And then, you know, like, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. You could look then and say, all right, we need to improve communication between the family members at home. You know, what could we do as a group to work on that? So that's what Connecticut did. And I don't have any numbers for them, but they're one of the top centers in the country and have been consistently for the last 5 years. So that was the end of what I had to say. I'd be happy to take questions or talk about anything you guys like. Go ahead.
I think you mentioned this, but could you speak a little bit more on, if there's small numbers, how putting it on a graph may give you false? Right.
So you can imagine that if you have only a few numbers, for example, if you weigh yourself 3 days in a row, there can be a 5-pound weight difference just from how much you had to drink, or you know, if you exercised and those kinds of things. So 3 numbers does not produce a good representative value of a change over time, or you know, what's the stable value. So really larger numbers of measurements produce a number that you have more confidence in. And what happens with, for example, the predicted survival in CF, it just jumps up and down because there are only a few hundred deaths every year out of a population of 25,000. And so just a few more deaths in, you know, a couple of sick kids can really change that number. So what we've started to do is look over 5 years, and that produces a much more stable number. We're much more confident that the median predicted survival now is 38, because, you know, the year before last it was 37, and then last year it went down to 36.8, and everybody was like, oh no. But really wasn't a true change. Does that help? Okay.
What about socioeconomic, like Connecticut compared to Detroit? That's really not a fair comparison.
Well, that's absolutely true. What John was talking about is that socioeconomic factors mean a big difference. Mississippi compared to Maine is a huge difference just in the social support and the resources and the educational levels and all of those things that go into making up socioeconomics. And what I would say to you, for quality improvement, you don't worry about that, because Hispanic girls are doing worse in this population. There are some centers that have a lot of Hispanics. New Mexico, Texas, California, Florida have a large Hispanic population, and Hispanic girls aren't doing as well. But when you're doing quality improvement, you can't come in, talk to a girl who's Hispanic and say, if you were just Caucasian, you know. Or if you just had $40,000 more a year as household income, I could help you. You know, you have to work with who you have in front of you. If you want to compare a Texas center to the Maine center, all the data that's out there publicly on the web is adjusted. We do a statistical adjustment to take into account the fact that the race and ethnicity, household income, those things are different between Texas and Maine. But when you are dealing with quality improvement, you have to deal with the true numbers, because you can then move those actual numbers. You don't want to worry that the statistical adjustment is getting in the way of the clinical care. Well, thank you.